Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Mental Health Advice and Response Service, aka MARS as we're known, your friends at the court. And in this particular case, as we're from the Barwon Mental Health Service, that is, as pictured below, the Geelong Magistrates Court. Geelong area, we're linked to the Swanston Centre Inpatient Unit, community teams in Bellarine, Geelong West, Colac, Corio, and Surf Coast. Jigsaw is our young person service, and a range of wonderful sister services that are far too numerous for us to go into now. I'm Onda Mehta, and my co-host today is Kelly Holopainen. We're both nurses based at the court, and we will take turns in speaking to you today as we, or me in this particular case, couldn't quite figure out the whole live transition IT thing. One little amendment before we go on. Whilst colloquially we're often referenced as MARS, we try to go with court liaison or mental health at the courts, because when you say Mars, people say, what? All the way from Mars, or you get reception from Mars. Well, let's just say in the last year I've heard that joke 300 times. So this is us. I'll leave you to determine who's who. Obviously, we're both nurses. I've been practicing for about 15 years, predominantly in different segments with Northwestern Mental Health, mostly inpatient and with Midwest Central in the community, doing case management and acute community outreach, that type of stuff. Kelly has been practicing a few years longer than I have and has worked much more heavily in the forensic system with Thomas Embling, and she's a bit of a stalwart here at Barwon Health, having spent some time with the Bellarine community team. You know, that clinician that seems to know all the patients and all the staff in a service? That's Kelly. So the idea for this presentation developed in the months after I started here at Barwon MARS. As does happen when anyone starts at a new service, let alone a new workplace, the first patch of time generally sees you start to become familiar with the role, the work, and generally how all the different areas fit together. So in this case, it was fascinating to watch how the consumers would, for example, transition from the police cells to before the magistrate, who would rationalise either a custodial or non-custodial disposition. Then there were the police prosecutors and solicitors, who, as it turns out, aren't mortal enemies that despise each other, but often work together to determine what, if any, conditions could be placed on bailing a consumer so as to mitigate the risk to the community. Hence, if there's a middle ground such as curfews, reporting, a corrections order with AOD conditions, etc., bail goes unopposed. Whilst absolutely it can be contentious and adversarial at times, it's a lot more collaborative than one might assume. Then there are avenues for the custodial health services to access information for people going deeper into the system to make sure that treatment isn't interrupted, finding out how and where people progress through the prisons, how to access that information, the types of factors that influence sentencing that often have a lot more to do with managing risk and the consumer's recovery prospects than actually being punitive and about punishment. And I kind of thought to myself as I was learning this, it would have been so great to have known this stuff sooner. Like many of you in case management, I found that to be quite a challenging beast to get a handle on. Stop me if you've heard this one before, but many of the consumers on my caseload fit into some type of combination of psychotic illness, illicit substance use, depot, poor engagement, antisocial traits, offending history complicated by just an awful upbringing, trauma, limited support, seemingly 1,000 warning signs and opportunities to have intervened earlier and help avoid what ultimately feels like a fairly chronic outcome. And as is common with these indicators, they're often in and out of custody fairly regularly with relatively minor to moderate offending and reoffending. Now, I knew about Mars Sunshine, but my contact with them was always more in the context of finding out what the charges are and the release date. I didn't really look for more than that. The idea of developing a better understanding of what it meant for our consumers, or that they could be helped through the court processes and stronger linkages with the court services, there was a lot of potential to better inform clinical decision making.
Where does Mars fit into the sort of mental health services that are available? Well, we are here in the regional court in Geelong, so we're linked primarily to the area mental health service where our court is based, which is Barwon Health. But with some of the metropolitan teams, they're employed by Forensicare, and so they're not directly linked to an area mental health service. And some courts, say Melbourne, for example, will have court users from a wide variety of areas, and so therefore that they'll make referrals to a lot of more services than we do here in the regional areas. We have access to the statewide rapid CMI database, and we also have access to the local area mental health databases being employed by Barwon Health. The metropolitan courts will have contact with the other services, but they'll also have access to the prison-based and the Forensicare databases as well, which we don't have access to those here. But luckily, the regional teams are all linked in with the other the metropolitan teams, and and we're overseen by Forensicare, so they're always kind enough to help us out if we're needing some information sharing. So our functions most similarly cross between community assessment and triage services. So we do a little bit of both, as well as take phone calls and assessments just like community teams do, and triage teams. And as I have mentioned, where the operations of the Mars service is driven by the forensic services, Forensicare, the day-to-day needs of the Magistrates Court, also the custody cells that are attached to the courts. Our role. So the Mars goals and objectives are to improve the mental health outcomes and reduce associated offending for individuals with a mental illness appearing before the court. We try and divert individuals with a mental illness appearing before the court from the criminal justice system into appropriate mental health treatment, reduce delays in court proceedings, and improve the appropriateness of mental health interventions and referrals for individuals appearing before the court. So we do provide mental health service to custodial health, seeking assessment, treatment and management, or even just psychiatric histories of people who are currently in police custody cells. For the magistrates or solicitors, to ensure timely advice is provided for those people using the court. The members of the general public that may, be attending the court on that day may be presenting with some mental health issues downstairs, may be needing some extra support and guidance here at the court, for varied reasons. We also do corrections assessments for mental health condition on community corrections orders to ensure that appropriate referrals and recommendations are made on people's community corrections orders. We help facilitate outcomes of the service users that were or are remanded, and if they're returning to court, we follow up with people that are remanded for short periods or otherwise due back at the court, facilitate admissions from either people presenting to court in the day from the police cells here, or from people being put on assessment orders in court, in custody, as well as providing information, as well as and advice to people. And also accessing information regarding available resources and services for people, and just general requests. Get all sorts here. The focus of Mars is to address the immediate mental health needs of the individual, and where the court would benefit, provide specialist advice to the court to the individual's mental health. Things to keep in mind: we strive to provide a service for everyone at the court that requires mental health support. That can make our role somewhat nebulous at times, as we represent the court, the health service and Forensicare. For clients of the service returning to court, our role is primarily to facilitate the treatment plan rather than drive it. Assessments drive outcomes, not the other way around, just like the needs often determine the role.
So how can Mars support you? Working directly with the consumers and health professionals leads to a certain degree of professional crossover. Obviously, we can get information about court proceedings and outcomes, assist in locating where consumers are transferred to post-hearing. A typical day sees us do a CMI review of everyone in the police cells, and often that's how it comes to the attention of services that consumers have been apprehended. Depending on capacity, we can orientate people to the court, help them link in with legal aid, go through what talking to the magistrate is like. Often it's just a conversation. Ever needed to assess someone in the police cells, we can do that with you or take you down there. And of course, we facilitate admissions and act as a point of contact between the courts, the inpatient unit, police, and the solicitors. Helping you. So let's make sure that expectations are realistic. As you can imagine, there's a lot of triaging and crisis response work. I've come to take an IVO out against my neighbour. Sounds fine until it's being heard in open court and it becomes apparent that the neighbour is believed to be a cannibal. Or we hear the phrase, I really should be in hospital instead of prison, or I'll be extremely depressed if I go to prison. These are typical scenarios, surprisingly especially the cannibal one, that don't have to generate an urgent psychiatric response. Likewise, there's an opportunity to ensure that as consumers transition between custody and the community, both ways, but especially if they're transitioning out to community teams, that the actual team has been made aware of the referral, that they have the release information, are aware of the outcome, and have a plan in place. It's a lot of opportunities for parts of that process to break down. Another common scenario is that we may come across consumers that have been referred for assessment to services but aren't engaging, and hence there's an opportunity for us to start the process. Finally, there's a lot of opportunity here to work with either the magistrates, solicitors, police prosecutions, corrections, etc., about how the mental health system works, treatment order implications, e.g. a consumer not doing what you want doesn't mean that they're admittable. What are reasonable expectations of treatment, strengths and limitations of an inpatient admission? How do you treat schizophrenia, depression, personality disorders, etc.? That last one is particularly significant because people or the magistrates can often see how psychological distress contributes to offending behaviour, but are not necessarily clear as to what happens next or how it's addressed. So here are a few examples of how it fits together. Number one, the missing consumer. Bread and butter stuff. Consumer of the service, maybe on a TO or depot, was engaging, then unexpectedly missed an appointment. The case manager's called, sent letters, there've been home visits, but no contact. Not sure if they've moved. And here they are in custody. So in this scenario, we do a mental state, risk assessment, etc., find out what's happened. Do they have a new mobile address? Are they still on treatment? Why or why not? And make the next appointment. So we have the consumer on a treatment order to a different service in our catchment. History indicates that the risk to others is particularly prominent if they're unwell or untreated, with one very significant past charge. Offending on this occasion was very minor. Engagement has been inconsistent but not alarming. They've reported compliance, but it's not verified, and the case manager was less than convinced. Now, there are symptoms present that go hand in hand with past offending, but they're not exactly new, and the consumer is now homeless. No contact for a fortnight or so, but there hadn't been any acute concerns between appointments. The police, however, were very concerned about risk and a lack of more intense supervision. So this was the cause of a lot of anxiety. Assessment revealed that presentation was at or close to baseline, but no contact with GP or pharmacies likely indicated no treatment. The presentation was in the realm of delusional disorder, hence the symptoms linked to the major offending were there, but weren't new or particularly exacerbated. So temporary accommodation was found in catchment that allowed the treating team to have further contact. The local community mental health service could offer interim outreach and monitoring and support, and the respective services could coordinate a longer-term plan. This addressed all the police and court concerns and saw both services support each other and the consumer. So this scenario was the first episode psychosis that saw a very high-risk criminal activity that was driven entirely by psychosis, with solicitors indicating we were in a not guilty by mental impairment realm. We were looking at a gradual deterioration over months that resulted in hallucinations, delusions, not being picked up on because of isolation, no previous contact, no drugs, no offending history. We ended up in an acting on command hallucination scenario with the individual who could rationalize that it didn't make sense, but was sure there was more to it. Very nice, perplexed and overwhelmed individual. Very straightforward AO. Concerns from the courts and police centred around, well, what if he's released in a few days or a week and left to his own devices? Obviously, he can't be supervised all the time, and what risk does that present to the community? So in this case, it was about going through the process. First episode psychosis, gradual and extended deterioration, no drugs, limited support, high risk offending, no previous public contact means limited history and collateral, homelessness was going to be an issue. The signs did not point to a quick admission at all. Almost certainly there'd be strong consideration for a treatment order on discharge and case management, probably a referral to a CAT type service or equivalent thereof, transitioning back to the community. And probably you're going to want to explore and put in as many supports around this person pre-discharge, family, friends, GP, etc., most of which were unknown to us at that stage. This was another out of area and way out of area person, hence it was based pretty heavily about educating the courts regarding how the services were structured and look like so that they can make an informed decision. There was also potential for pre-planning with the incoming services if it went that way, and the court where the matter would ultimately be heard, which fortunately had its own MARS. And on that point, as we're running out of time, the MARS service is offered all around the state, from Melbourne to Frankston to Moorabbin, Dandenong, Ringwood, Heidelberg, Sunshine, Broadmeadows, and regionally at Geelong, Ballarat, Bendigo, Shepparton and the Latrobe Valley. These emails listed above are always the best way to initiate contact, and I guess the individual clinicians can give you the lay of the land. But the key message is get in touch. We're only too happy to help. Thank you very much for your time, and we will take any questions.